So the goal of this mobile first or responsive approach is to say, we don't know what kind of screen you're going to be on, we're not sure what size it's going to be, and we know that there's going to be new devices proliferating even after we finish doing what we're doing in terms of building the current site. So with a mobile first or responsive approach, it's much more about saying, what is the information we want to communicate? And to strip that down, if we only had a small mobile screen, what would we show to people? And then you kind of progressively enhance that so that as you have more screen real estate, rather than moving from a small window to a larger one, you can start to say, what could I do with that extra space? How could I use that more effectively and start to bring additional elements, whether it's a search button or related content on the side or perhaps some ads, whatever you think is appropriate for your business model, that will allow you to provide an increasingly engaging experience as you get more real estate to play with. So we've spent a bunch of time talking about mobile websites. What I want to start to talk about now is applications. So this is where we're going from something where I've got to go to Safari, I've got to type in the URL, and I've got to wait for it to download, to something that's just sitting right there on my home screen, and all I need to do is tap on it. And there are three approaches to building those apps that I really want to take some time to distinguish between. So let's start with simple applications. There are a number of benefits of building an app as opposed to just having a website. Firstly, you get some of the most important and valuable real estate on the planet. You get right in front of a user on their home screen, if you're lucky, or at least on one of the screens that they're kind of going to swipe through over time. So it's a wonderful way to really get real estate that's perpetual marketing for your business. There's also discoverability. If you're Facebook or LinkedIn, you'll probably have an app, but there's an argument that maybe you don't need it because people are going to be using Facebook and LinkedIn anyway. But what happens if you want to create an app for finding people in a given location? Or you want to create an app for Sudoku or for something else? Obviously, you're going to want to market that yourselves, but you've got the opportunity that if you create an app, it will be in the app stores. It can be in the Amazon marketplace. It can be on the iTunes store. And as you get apps into those marketplaces, they can potentially be found by people who otherwise would never have heard of your business. So there's a lot of competition there, but potentially it's a great way for startups and companies that have product offerings that would be of interest to more people than they have direct communication links to anyway. You don't have an email list of everyone who'd want to use your app. Being in an app store can be a great way to do that. There are also a number of features like push notifications or access to the camera, which are only available in an app. And over time, more of those features are going to be available through Safari and through the browsers, but especially things like access to your contacts book. You probably don't want that when you just go to a website, it can suddenly download all of your contacts and make that public. You'd want really explicit, safe permissioning around that. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of features will continue to only be available to people who develop apps. And then there's other benefits like potentially the ability to use the app offline, so that if I'm underground, if I'm on a subway, if I'm on an airplane, if I want to play Sudoku, as long as I've downloaded some quizzes, I can do that as long as I have an app. Whereas if I have a website, that probably wouldn't work. And then the other reason why a lot of people end up building applications rather than websites is just for performance. If you're going to do something which has very complex graphical requirements, let's say you're doing a first-person shooter game, something like that, you're absolutely going to want to have an app for that because the performance of applications is much, much more efficient than the way that a website executes code. So how do you go about it? Let's say you want to get started with an app. How do you start with that? Well, the simplest possible way you could get started is using a tool that's often called PhoneGap. Now it's actually PhoneGap, the company behind PhoneGap, Natobi, actually got bought by Adobe a while back. So now there's also a separate project, Apache Cordova, but it's basically another name for the same thing. And what PhoneGap is about is it's a way for you to think of it as a way to hack an app quickly. I think that's the best way to look at it. As it says, easily create apps with the only free open source framework that supports 7 mobile platforms. And the great thing about building apps using PhoneGap is that your developers can use skills that they likely already have. Because basically what Cordova does, or PhoneGap that you'll hear the terms used interchangeably. These days, most people still call it PhoneGap, but if you hear Cordova, they're talking about the same thing. And basically what most people do, if you want to build an app using PhoneGap, Cordova, all you do is basically you create an HTML web page. And then you add the CSS to make it look pretty, to make it look the way you'd want, just as if you were building a mobile website. And in fact, people will often take mobile websites they've built and then run it through PhoneGap, make a few little tweaks to it, and then what it does is it packages up this mobile website. So you've got your HTML that has your content, the CSS that makes it so it looks good, and maybe a little bit of JavaScript to make it interact in a more engaging way. And what you do is you package all that up in PhoneGap, and PhoneGap turns it into a boxed application that gets downloaded to the mobile device. And what's great about that experience is that it means that somebody who only knows HTML, CSS, and JavaScript can fairly quickly build an application that can be put into the app stores.